A COVID cluster grows. The virus spreads from Taiwan's largest airport to the community. The search continues. President Tsai visits the family of a missing F-16 pilot.
I'm Yin Khvat for TaiwanPlus, here at one of the largest household registration offices in Taipei, which made history on Thursday by completing the adoption of a child by a same-sex couple.
Repression on the rise. Human Rights Watch charts how the Chinese Communist Party tightened its grip on the country. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. A new cluster of COVID-19 infections at a bank in northern Taiwan has grown to 14 people. The cluster appears to be related to the Taoyuan International Airport cases, and the government has now taken measures to contain it from spreading even further. Our reporter Sandy Chi has more.
What started as a handful of infections at the nation's largest airport in Taoyuan earlier this month has spawned a new cluster in another part of the city. On Thursday morning, Taoyuan Mayor Tsai Ing-wen announced a 13th employee of the Union Bank of Taiwan in Zhongli District had tested positive for COVID-19, along with a family member of a previous case. Testing is ongoing.
这个群聚感染，那其他人正在采检确认中。那30个航员，包括了清洁人员、警卫，都要采检。
In an attempt to contain the spread, the government has taken several steps. All close contacts of the confirmed cases are already in quarantine. And 7 schools that were visited by close contacts and their family members were closed on Thursday. Health authorities have also assigned 24 hospitals in northern Taiwan to handle cases related to the Taoyuan airport cluster. They are urging people who may have come into contact with the cases to get tested.
因为有群聚感染的现象，所以我们这个直接在下午就开了社区采检站。那位在东兴社区的活动中心，那晚间也开，主要是希望争取时间。1月4号以后曾经有足迹的，或者跟航员有接触的，都要出来采检。
While prevention measures ramp up in Taoyuan, a new case in Taipei has put healthcare workers in the spotlight. A nurse working at a hospital in Taipei City tested positive for COVID-19 a few days after receiving a booster shot. Taipei Mayor Ko Wen-je spoke about the risk to people on the front lines.
护理师进去照顾这些确诊者以来，不小心就会污染到了。这种装满确诊者的病房，你知道，迟早会破火。
With the Lunar New Year fast approaching and more than 10,000 overseas travelers expected to enter Taiwan, announcements of new cases and measures to contain the spread seem more likely. Alex Chen and Sandy Chi for TaiwanPlus.
A Taiwanese Air Force pilot is still missing more than 2 days after his plane crashed into the ocean. President Tsai Ing-wen travelled to the southern city of Chiayi on Thursday to meet with rescue workers and the pilot's family. James Chater reports.
Helicopters circling overhead as the search for Taiwanese fighter pilot Chen Yi enters its 3rd day. On Thursday, President Tsai Ing-wen made a trip to Chiayi in southern Taiwan to receive updates from the rescue team. She also visited the pilot's family. The search for Chen has been hampered by low nighttime temperatures and bad weather, where the F-16V went missing on Tuesday afternoon.
家属就是跟着我们一起集气，然后因为我们现在现有的装备，我们几乎都是用上了，只是这几天的晚上海象也不是很好。
Aviation experts are now trying to ascertain what might have led to the incident. Chen was carrying out a low-altitude bombing exercise when he went missing, and when conducting exercises of that nature, pilots can feel gravitational forces up to 5 times stronger than on Earth, leading to blackouts like those seen in this video. If a pilot loses consciousness, a plane equipped with a collision avoidance system will automatically climb when it approaches a hazard. That system was not yet installed in the Taiwanese F-16s. It's currently undergoing tests in the US and is due to be operational by November next year. Chen had been stationed at Chiayi Air Base for 22 months and had just over 60 hours of flying experience in the F-16 model.
你要到完训，要到战备持续训练完训，大概接近100架次。 100小时。如果今天他是一个成熟到队的 F-16飞行员，他1年大概有100来小时。
Dai Air Base is partly responsible for defense of the Taiwan Strait. Fighter jets are deployed from there to monitor aviation activity in Taiwan's air defense zone. Last year, there was a record number of incursions by China's Air Force, over 960.
因为扰台的因素造成飞行时间少啊，所有事情以战备为主嘛，那训练就其次了。训练价值降低，它飞行时间累积就少，飞行时间累积少，它飞行的风险就增高了。
More than 230 search and rescue workers are working round the clock to look for the pilot and to find clues as to what led to this tragedy. Chris Marr and James Chater for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's President Tsai Ing-wen has been invited to attend the inauguration ceremony of Honduras President-elect Xiomara Castro. It's seen as a sign of the Central American country's continuing diplomatic ties with Taiwan, which were established more than 80 years ago. Ahead of the elections in November, there was concern Honduras would pivot to Beijing, as Castro had expressed plans to establish ties with China during her presidential campaign. Those comments were later walked back after a series of meetings with US officials. Taiwan's presidential office will announce whether Tsai will lead a delegation for the ceremony, set for January 27th. Two men in Taipei on Thursday became the first same-sex couple to register as adoptive parents of a child where neither is a blood relative. Miao Miao and Wei Wei successfully sued the government to recognize both fathers as parents of Wei Wei's adopted daughter. Last month, the court ruled in their favor, but as Rick Glauert reports, their case does not set a precedent.
I'm in one of Taipei's largest household registration offices, which has made history by completing the adoption of a child by a same-sex couple. It's been a long journey for Miao Miao and Wei Wei. They sued the government to recognise both men as parents of Wei Wei's adopted daughter after they married. But the court ruling only applied to their case. It did not set a legal precedent. So for now, it is just this one couple that can celebrate this latest LGBT milestone.
终于，这一刻终于到了，就是我很期待，等一下，我小孩的身份证上面能够出现我的名字，对吧？终于到这一步，觉得很开心，然后觉得一路以来也很辛苦，对。然后虽然说很为我们自己的案件开心，但是呢，因为我们知道说我们还有其他一样无血缘收养的家庭还在诉讼。
In 2019, Taiwan became the first country in Asia to allow same-sex couples to marry, and is often heralded as a beacon of liberalism, hosting the largest LGBT pride event in Asia. But the marriage legislation fell short of granting equal marriage rights, including the right to joint adoption, which is only allowed when the child is biologically related to one of the parents. Under Taiwan law, opposite-sex couples and single people are allowed to adopt.
我们不应当让儿童的权利因为行政机关的怠惰或是持续严厉而有所损害，也更不应该让想要收养的同志家庭为了要收养，为了这个严厉中而必须离婚才有办法去帮助更多的家庭。我们呼吁法务部能够尽快修法，不要再让这件事情持续延宕。
司法已判准，立法请跟上。
Miao Miao, Wei Wei and their daughter are now officially a family. But many other couples like them are denied this opportunity. It's a reminder that despite its successes, Taiwan is still on the road to true LGBT equality. Patrick Chen and Rick Lau for TaiwanPlus.
An investigation led by Taiwan into two local fish farms whose grouper was banned for import by Beijing has found that both farms are complying with existing food standards. China suspended imports from the farms last week, with state media reporting that the grouper contained a synthetic dye that is banned for use in food products. But Taiwan's fisheries agency said it found no such residue in its investigation. Taiwan's semiconductor manufacturing company on Thursday reported a record quarterly net profit of $6 billion. This comes after an unprecedented shortage of semiconductors and growing demand for advanced chips. The chip giant's October to December profit is up 16% from a year ago. TSMC is the sole manufacturer of iPhone processors and is looking to expand its production capabilities with tie-ups in the United States and Japan. Human Rights Watch has released its annual report on China, citing increased repression in the country in 2021. The international rights group says the Communist Party cracked down on speech deemed unpatriotic and continued to detain people for criticizing the government. Human Rights Watch's World Report 2022 also says the Chinese government tightened information flows from the Xinjiang region, further limiting access to Uyghurs and other Turkic Muslims under the guise of COVID-19. For more details, our reporter Louise Watt spoke to senior researcher on China at Human Rights Watch, Wang Yaqiu.
I think the trend has been going on for since President Xi Jinping came to power, and this trend has continued to be the way it was, which is that the repression in China has gotten worse. Human rights violations in China have gone worse. And this is another year that things just getting worse. One of the biggest achievements of the human rights community is that the US government has passed the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. Anything that exported to the United States from Xinjiang would be presumed to be used by forced labor. So companies have to prove that it is not made by forced labor, then it can enter the United States. So that's a pretty high bar. And, we're happy to see that happened. And then there are also, diplomatic boycotts by various governments on the Beijing 2022 Olympics Games, which will happen in February. So I think this is a way for Western governments to take a stand and say, we don't want to participate in this game that is held by a government that is committing crimes against humanity in Xinjiang and severe crackdowns in Hong Kong.
The Chinese government has said that it's closed down what others say were camps for Uyghurs and other ethnic minorities in Xinjiang. What have you found?
The government has closed some camps and transferred the detainees to heavily securize the factories, so they became part of the forced labor. Then their evidence showed that there are expanded certain facilities. So this goes both ways. Some camps they have closed, some camps they have are expanded. And then there are also evidences of detainees in those camps being transferred into formal prisons. So I think overall, I don't think the situation is getting better. There are different, trends, but people are still being detained in those camps. And even for people who are not detained, they work in those factories that they are in effective work as forced labor.
A Hong Kong opposition activist has been rearrested for allegedly violating bail conditions. Owen Chow was first detained in January last year on charges of subverting state power. Released on bail in June, he was taken into custody again last night, accused of making statements online that endanger national security. Hong Kong police have warned netizens that posts online in support of Chow or other detainees could also be considered illegal. Meanwhile, Hong Kong Chief Executive Carrie Lam is moving to introduce new security legislation in the territory, which would increase the scope of national security crimes. Coming up, we take you to an eco-friendly village in New Taipei City to show you how residents are using green energy to revitalize their community. Details after the break.
Welcome to Legit Mando. Today we're going to learn the Mandarin phrases 我吃,我喜欢吃 and 我最爱吃。你也喜欢吃鸡排吗？我最爱吃鸡排。
你吃过了吗？
吃过了吗 actually used as a greeting, like saying, how are you?
I eat vegetarian food, obviously. Can I just go eat my salad? And when I'm back, you'll be done, yeah?
Nope. You're stuck with me.
这是我们台湾人要送给台湾的礼物。
我们都清楚，我们都在一起在完成一件事情。
这是我们的根。
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Authorities in Kazakhstan say they have detained another 1,700 people on Wednesday over unrest that shook the country last week. The total number of those arrested for allegedly participating in the anti-government protests now stands at around 12,000. Nearly all the latest detentions were concentrated in the largest city, Almaty, the site of the most violent clashes. More than 2,000 troops from a Russia-led military alliance were brought in last week at the request of the president to help quell the protests. They will start withdrawing from Kazakhstan on Thursday. At least 160 were killed in the demonstrations and ensuing clashes, which started on January 2nd over soaring fuel prices. Kazakhstan's President Kassym-Jomart Tokayev has dubbed the nationwide protests an attempted coup led by foreign-trained terrorists. Our reporter Ryan Kilpatrick asked Emily Couch, Eurasia specialist at the press freedom group PEN America, to find out what effect it has had on opposition in the country.
The trigger or the spark for this current moment of unrest was the rise in the price of liquefied petroleum gas. However, it would be wrong to say that rising energy prices were the primary reason for these protests, because that's not the case. The main reasons I think that we can see underlying the protests that are happening across the country is a dissatisfaction with the continued dominance of Nursultan Nazarbayev, who was president of Kazakhstan since the fall of the Soviet Union. Even though he stepped down in 2019, he has maintained significant influence. And I think that Kazakhstani citizens are tired of this old order, of this old guard. And as in other countries in the region, we've seen that Nazarbayev has enriched his friends, enriched his relatives at the expense of ordinary Kazakhstani citizens. And given that the economic situation has significantly deteriorated there, these multiplicity of factors have really come together, and this is a moment where years and years of frustrations that Kazakhstani citizens have felt about economic unfairness, political unfairness, are really coming to light.
Moscow and Beijing are generally seen as strategic rivals in Central Asia, vying for influence over countries like Kazakhstan. But in this instance, they're very much singing from the same hymn book. China has also condemned the protests as foreign-backed color revolutions, using the same kind of rhetoric they used against pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong, although those claims have also never been substantiated. And they've also openly backed Russian intervention in Kazakhstan. So are they rivals? And if so, why are their interests so seemingly aligned on this issue?
The Sino-Russian partnership, if we can call it that, is very interesting because it's a relationship in which Beijing is very clearly the senior partner. Beijing is at liberty to pick and choose where it decides that it's going to sing from the same hymn sheet as the Kremlin. On this topic of color revolutions, this is a point at which they usually converge. This is not the first time that Beijing has used the term color revolution, which is a phrase that originates from the former Soviet Union. Russia has a lot more investment in Kazakhstan than China does, not just on a political and economic level, but also on a level of national prestige. There's a reluctance on Moscow's side to truly see Kazakhstan as an independent country with sovereignty that should be respected. For now, Beijing is not as prominent in these discussions, but as is often the case in moments of popular uprising, autocrats stick together And I think that's what we're seeing here in the joint response from Russia and China.
For the first time in over 4 months, Japan hit a daily count of over 10,000 new COVID-19 infections on Wednesday. Local media reports say the country is fighting a 6th wave of the pandemic fueled by the Omicron variant. To avoid overloading its medical system, Japan has changed protocols and will only hospitalize COVID-19 cases who are at risk of developing severe symptoms. More beds will be made available in hospital treatment. The government is also considering cutting the wait for a booster shot by a month for people over 65. Almost 80% of the country's population is fully vaccinated. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is facing calls to resign after he admitted to attending a party while the United Kingdom was under a strict COVID lockdown in 2020. Under restrictions at the time, only 2 people from 2 households were allowed to meet outdoors, keeping a 2-meter distance. But an email from Johnson's private secretary invited around 100 people to socially distanced drinks in the garden of number 10 Downing Street. Facing Parliament for the first time since these latest allegations emerged, Johnson said he must take responsibility, but that he believed implicitly that it was a work event. The Prime Minister's repeated apologies did little to ease calls for his resignation, led by the opposition Labour Party.
Well, there we have it. After months of deceit and deception, the pathetic spectacle of a man who's run out of road. His defence that he didn't realise he was at a party. It is so ridiculous that it's actually offensive to the British public. He's finally been forced to admit what everyone knew, that when the whole country was locked down, he was hosting boozy parties in Downing Street. Yes. Is he now going to do the decent thing and resign?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I appreciate the point that he's making about the event that I attended. I want to repeat that I thought it was a work event, and Mr. Speaker, I regret very much that we did not do things differently that evening, Mr. Speaker, as I've said, and I take responsibility and I apologise, Mr. Speaker.
The Australian government is still deciding whether to cancel tennis player Novak Djokovic's visa for a second time. This comes after the world #1 tennis player apologised on Instagram for the false travel history his agent made on his Australian immigration form. The tennis player also acknowledged he should have rescheduled an interview with a French newspaper after testing positive for COVID-19. Djokovic had earlier won a court case to overturn the original cancellation of his visa. The government aims to have 20% of all Taiwan's energy to be generated by renewables by the year 2025. But despite the initiative, many communities are facing obstacles in converting to green energy. Bichi Zhuang reports on how one farming village's journey to become more eco-friendly.
A green community in New Taipei. Zhongliao is a suburban farming village known for its organic produce. Many of the eco-friendly locals have also paid out of pocket to generate green energy, installing solar panels on their rooftops. The community set up a green energy cooperative in 2019, with 9 solar energy plants now in operation.
这些公民电厂有收益的话，它会回馈我们5%的那个回馈金给我们社区做公益基金这样子，因为我们社区有在推老人共餐。
There are only 5 green energy cooperatives in Taiwan. All of them have had trouble with fundraising and finding suitable space.
所以合法屋顶是要有起造证明、使用执照，然后没有违法的再加盖，建物跟土地的使用都合于台湾的所有法规。那这样的在新北市或者台北市真的不容易找到。
From a regulatory standpoint, school and government agency rooftops are ideal for solar panels. But few remain available as most are already under contract to corporate operators.
所有的招标法对于公民电厂是不友善的，统包招租的方式永远只有大的系统商、超大型的系统商才可以得标。那这样子是不利于小型的案场的推展。
Taiwan aims to generate 20% of its electricity through renewable energy by 2025, and there are calls for the government to step in and help guide smaller operators.
可以成立中央的辅导团，在各县市政府设立专案的服务，协助民间有心推动公民电厂的人。
With energy transformation a shared national goal, more villages are being encouraged to turn to green like Zhongliao, which has put the benefits of renewables into renewing its community. Rick Yi and Peachy Zhuang for TaiwanPlus.
Thank you for watching TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. We'll leave you with footage of twin panda cubs on public display at a zoo in Tokyo. For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, please download the TaiwanPlus app. Stay safe and see you next time.